mention that to start. So, as Matt said, we're in a series called For, and last week we just considered the basic idea that if God is for us, shouldn't by extrapolation we be for others, right? As he works through us and we mirror his heart to a watching world. Sadly, according to the stats, and you probably know from just conversations among family, friends on the street, as it were, sometimes people get the impression that we are better known by what we're against than what we are for. So this morning I want to talk about something. I had a title for this message. I would call it For Doubters. We are for doubters, which might seem strange, right? Considering we as an institution, if you want to go formal, are all about belief and faith. And isn't doubt the antithesis of that? Isn't it the opposite of that? Well, hold on to that. That's what we want to consider. Just thought I'd go to yearbooks. I was going to show my yearbook picture, but when I looked at it, I got so depressed because this guy ate that guy, and there was hair and youth, and just too depressing. I'm not showing you. That'll just be for my family to watch and make fun of. But I won't show it to you guys. But I started to think about the common practice that most yearbooks have gotten away from. But, for a long time, if you date yourself, they had the most likely to, blank. You'd have the most likely to be a professional athlete, right? You might have the most likely to run a prosperous company, right? The most likely to become famous, go to Hollywood. And what if there's just some poor guy? I just, found this online. You pluck some poor guy. I'm going 70s here. Out of oblivion, and you found a picture like this, right? Here's a poor dude. Looks like a 70s shot, right? We'll call him Doug Forsett. Most likely to be full of doubts. Can you imagine that at the award ceremony? Everybody clapping, most likely to succeed, most likely to prosper. And then there's Doug Forsett, most likely to be full of doubts. And people are sort of like, yes, that's great, right? I wanted to kind of jar you with that a little bit. If that was what your legacy, forever enshrined in your high school annual was, how would you feel, right? What does that tell us about the subject of doubt? Well, I might put it like this. We don't esteem doubt very highly, do we? Right? Doubt is something you probably rarely commended somebody. You know what I love about this girl I work with? She doubts everything, right? I mean, do you ever say that? Do you ever say, my kid, he doubts everything I ever say, right? We never commend doubt. If we're honest, we probably view doubt as somewhat of a deficiency. And I think one of the reasons we may do that is we often consider doubt rejection when I'm not sure that's what doubt actually is. So to tie all this together, I want to be very clear. I hope, my prayer for CFC is that we would be known as a church that is for doubters. In other words, doubters might enter our service. They might engage with us in our web of relationships in the community. And they might say, you know what? They know that I doubt, but they're still for me. And I'm not sure that many people would necessarily say that when they think of church, religion in general. So I just wanted to start in the beginning of the church's first kind of history book, the story of the ancient church. It was written by Luke. Now, he's already written a first book that we call the Gospel of Luke about the life of Jesus. And now he writes a second book about the life of the church after Jesus left this earth and returned to his Father's side in heaven. He writes to a man, I won't get into that, named Theophilus, but just let's see how he introduces his book. It's very formal, and Luke is an historian, does a lot of research, and he says, in the first book, O Theophilus, I've dealt with all that Jesus began to do and teach. The implication is, even though he's not here physically, everything I'm about to tell you for the next 28 chapters is what Jesus continues to do and teach through the church. Until the day when he was taken up after he had given commands through the Holy Spirit to the apostles whom he had chosen. He presented himself alive. That's what we celebrated 2 weeks ago, Easter. Right? So this is kind of like an Easter message still, 2 weeks afterwards, because after his suffering, he presented himself alive by many proofs, appearing to them 40 days and speaking about the kingdom of God. So Jesus rises from the dead. Tomb is empty. It's what we celebrated, considered 2 weeks ago. But it's relevant every Sunday. We wouldn't be here. The church is not an in memoriam institution where we remember the reputation or the legacy of somebody who's died. That's not what the church is. The church, historic Christianity, is the assembly of people who believe that Jesus is alive and still with us. And after he defeated death, was alive, he proved it to his own followers. So let's step back and ask this question. Why is Jesus proving that he is alive to the same people who'd seen him do miracles many, many times, right? And I don't have time to summarize that, but you know a couple of the big highlights. It's not every day you see somebody walking out on the ocean, right, when you're down at the shore, right? You might see somebody wading into the water, but if they were 30 feet out and they're walking on the surface like it's cement, there's not something you see every day. But that's what they saw Jesus do. It's not every day you see a couple of paltry pieces of fish and a couple of scraps of bread, and he turns that into a feast that could feed potentially 15,000 people. That's not something you see every day. You don't typically go to a funeral or a memorial service and see somebody come in and speak to the person lying there in the casket, arise, and they come back to life. You don't typically see that every day. But these guys saw Jesus do it. But after he comes back from the dead, he is showing proofs that they're not the victim of a mass hallucination. They didn't have a bunch of weird mushrooms on their pizza, right? They didn't get together and have some collective, sort of cultic ritual that created this fantasy in their minds. He is showing people that they're not imagining it, that he's not a ghost, that he's not a figment of their wildest imaginations. He's proving himself. Can I ask this? To whom do you prove yourself to? People that doubt you. And if you're wondering if I'm reading too much into it, let's see what I'm inferring in a little more explicit fashion. Let's go to Matthew chapter 28. Then the 11 disciples, we typically know that there were 12 apostles, disciples, but one at this point, Judas, has tragically ended his own life out of guilt for betraying Jesus. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. Keep in mind, hey guys, I'm going to die, and I'm going to come back. And when I come back, I want you to meet on this mountain. He points it out. Again, we're so used to seeing that. Just can I pause a moment? Imagine you're hanging out with somebody this week, right? You're at Starbucks, you're talking, and they're like, hey, listen, this week's going to be a little crazy. I'm going to die on Friday, so let's meet back here next Wednesday at this same booth, right? You'd be kind of like, all right? You kidding me here, bud? What are you saying? We're just so used to the religious tone when we see this stuff in church. That's what Jesus, hey, I'm going to die, but then I'm going to come back. And by the way, let's use this mountain, this spot I'll point out there. That's where I want you to meet me. So keep that in mind. The 11 disciples go to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, I love the realism of this passage. They worshiped him, but some doubted. These aren't just strangers. These weren't the hangers-on to the Jesus crowd that followed him throughout his life. These people were at the epicenter of all that miraculous stuff. And now they're seeing him, like seeing this person that died. And some worship, and some doubted. And of course, Jesus obliterated those doubters, right? Because how dare they? Oh, wait, he didn't. He receives this mixed bag of worship and doubt. Can I tell you, he's doing that this morning? His kindness, his grace is so big, it's so good. Parents, this is probably helpful. I've fallen into the trap too, when my kid does the right thing, but I can tell he's not doing it with the right motive, like I always do. And sometimes you're not doing it for the right reason. That's a whole other sermon. But I'm fascinated by it that Jesus is receiving this, and it's mixed with doubt. Just so saturated with hearts that are doubting what their eyes are clearly seeing. And that's just not an anomaly in Matthew. Look at Luke's account of the same phenomena. When they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11. These are the women that went and discovered that the tomb was empty. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the others who told this to the apostles. And there we are. The women are all shocked by the statement here by the men. But they did not believe the women because their words seemed to them like nonsense. And once again, I try to make this point every Easter. If the ancient stories of a resurrected Jesus are fabricated stories, they would be fabricated by his followers, right? They're the ones that would keep the thing going. Nobody else would even know about it. Why would they communicate the story in such a way where they look bad? If I get to tell my own story, if I tell my own story and I've just got the pen and all the freedom I want, I'm the number one draft pick, right? I'm the best. That's what I'm going to tell. But they're describing themselves factually. They didn't believe. Now, let me introduce, I'm going to go through all these quickly this morning, the first of 3 stories in the Gospels that get a little bit more personal. I'm going to talk about 3 people. One dude is named Thomas. One is named John. So some of you might know him as John the Baptist. And the other is a nameless father who is dealing with what all of us fear, a child who is suffering beyond our worst fears. And I want you to see how this theme plays out. And just keep in mind the subject of doubt and how it gets a bad rap. John's story of the events after the resurrection in John 20. Now Thomas, one of the 12, there we go. So he's one of Jesus' original followers. He was called the twin, so we know that he had a twin. I love that poor twin never gets any press. He's just a twin, right, of Thomas. Was not with them. And Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we've seen the Lord. So by this point, it's starting to register. But he said to them, unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger to the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe. I will never believe. John is the empiricist. He needs the multi-sensory proof, right? What he can see, what he can hear, what he can literally touch with his fingertips. I need to see it or I won't believe. Now, I wonder how his friends feel. Hey, thanks, Tom. Thanks for putting trust in our collective. There's 10 guys here telling you what we've seen. You just happen to be out doing whatever you were doing, and you don't believe in it. Nope, not believing it. This lingers for more than a week. Notice what happens next. 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, we talked about this on Easter, peace be with you. When the doors are locked, people debate, did Jesus go through a wall here? Did he appear? I don't know. I have my own guesses. But all I know is they got the doors locked. They're probably fearful of the Romans because there's this conspiracy rumor going around that Jesus might be on the loose when he should be encased in a stone tomb. And then Jesus has to come to this group and say, peace, relax, easy. He's basically telling them, don't die, don't faint, peace be to you. And then he turns his attention to Thomas and he lets him have it right. How dare you? Oh no, he doesn't do that. He simply turns to Thomas, put your finger here. See my hands. Put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. Do not disbelieve, but believe. So notice this. Doubting Thomas at this point is at a crossroads because doubt can lead to disbelief, unbelief. But Jesus sees that he's in this waiting room called doubt, and Jesus wants to move him the other way. He wants all of that doubt to just begin to tip. Put your hands in my hands, Tom. So tender. And you see that doubt has not fallen the other way because we have the most marvelous confessional statement of Jesus' identity, I think, from human lips anywhere in all 4 Gospels. It's right here in John 20:28. Thomas answered him, my Lord and my God. Yes. My God. That's not him saying it like OMG the way people do today. He's making a personal confession now that he's touched. You're my God. By the way, John's very different than the other Gospels. As more I study, the more I kind of get comfortable that the Gospel writers, and I believe they're inspired, of course, but they're bringing their own shaping style in the way they arrange the story of Jesus. And it appears that John makes this the other side of the spectrum compared to how he starts the book. This is how John starts his book, with no people, just a high kind of confession. John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. There's not much time to develop that. The word there is logos. It would have been understood by philosophers as something like the eternal principle in the universe. Not necessarily a person. Similar if you're a Star Wars fan, right? To Lucas's The Force, right? There's some bedrock influence in the universe. The philosophers would have understood the idea of the word similar to this. And John turns it on its head and says, let me tell you, you're right. In the beginning, there was this force, but he's not a force. He's not an inanimate kind of energy. He's a person. He's a person, and he's actually God. Now think, Ben, go back to the previous slide if you would, and consider how John wraps up his gospel. He starts with a bold theological, philosophical statement. Jesus is God. Well, anybody can say that. And by the time we've followed the whole story, it's as if we put ourselves in Thomas's sandals and say, my Lord and my God. I think the whole gospel is shaped to bring that out. So go two ahead, Ben, if you would. So, let's prepare again for Jesus' scolding of Thomas. How dare he doubt the Son of God, right? All that you saw, Tom. All my miracles. And you have the audacity to not even trust your friends after I told you I would rise again. We just don't see it with Jesus. We don't see it with him. This is not the way he is. It's often the way people imagine him. The disappointed deity who's waiting to dole out pain for our pathetic, vacillating faith. No, that's not who Jesus is. He tells the truth, but he does so we might say, pastorally, with care and concern. Notice what he says in verse 29. He says, Jesus said to him, have you believed because you've seen me? Blessed are those, and it's as if there's a sense that the years will become decades, and the decades centuries, and the centuries to millennia to this moment. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. So again, let's step back and extrapolate. If Jesus accommodates, Ben, if you go to that slide, if Jesus accommodates the doubt of those who actually saw him, how much more will he do the same with us? Think about that. You ever find yourself saying, man, I just wish I could have been there because then my faith would be stronger. I don't know. I'm actually more and more convinced the older I get that I would have been just like these guys. There's always a reason to doubt. There's always a reason to kind of, hold things in reserve. I need some time to process this. Right? There's always some time to delay the commitment of investing your heart in something this radical and incredible. And Jesus is saying, how much more blessed are those of us who've not seen? But there's some kernel of faith there, some kernel of belief, although it might be mixed with doubt. All right, that's my long one. The next two I'm going to go pretty short. Many of you, and some of you may not have, one of Jesus' relatives, John the Baptist, born about 6 months before Jesus. We learn most of this in Luke's account, although here, Matthew tells us something interesting. John the Baptist prepared the way for Jesus. He rolled out the red carpet. He was a wild guy. Wild dude. He would have caught your attention. He lived out in the wilderness for many years. He ate like locusts. I don't know why the Bible tells us that he ate locusts, wild honey. He's a wild man, out there in the wilderness. And one day the voice of the Lord comes to him and says, now, and he starts preaching, prepare for the Lord. Jesus himself. He baptized people in the Jordan River. There were crowds. I mean, John was a rock star. He was the enigmatic, wild-eyed preacher man in the wilderness, and people flocked to him. And Jesus is the one he pointed us to. And then John drops out of the picture, right? And the gospel writers focuses us on Jesus. By this point, John's been arrested. That's a whole other story. But I love this real piece. No movie director would do this, but real life storytellers are going to tell us things like this. Look at Matthew 11. Now, when John heard in prison about the deeds of the Christ, that's the Messiah, Jesus, he sent word by his disciples. So John had his own posse, and he said to him, "Are you the one who is to come? or shall we look for another?" What? John's the one who said, "He's here. My whole life has been about prepping for him." But then we find him in prison, and oh, what a shock. He's depressed. He's down. He's out like we are, and he's John the Baptist. He's not a stained glass person. He's you and he's me. And he's doubting, because when you're in prison and you're barely hanging on and you're surviving, you might start thinking, maybe I was wrong. Maybe my whole life was wasted. So Jesus gets word from his friends, and of course, here comes the scolding, right? "How dare you, cuz? You were my boy. You prepped me. How dare you not believe?" Oh, that doesn't happen. Look what Jesus says when he sends message back. And Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John." Just love it, right? Just tells the truth. "Go and tell John what you hear and see. Tell him that blind people see again. Tell him that lame people walk, lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and that the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them." He accommodates John, who is riddled with doubt. John. I mean, this isn't some middle school kid, right, who heard something, saw something on a TikTok video and is now not sure about the Bible. This is John, right? We think of doubt as something, you'll get past it, you'll get past it. And sometimes we don't get past it. Sometimes it grips us and it overwhelms us. And it's all that we can see, especially when we suffer. And Jesus knows that. Finally, nameless man. There's so much happening here. I just got to parachute in really quickly. I'm mindful of our time. Jesus' disciples can't take care of a young man who is just being wrecked by a demonic presence at loose in his body, in his heart. It's just terrible. And Jesus now encounters the father who is just heartsick over the fate of his poor, suffering son. So let's land there. Mark 9. Jesus asked his father, the boy's father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And the father said, "From childhood. It has often cast him into the fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." Notice not just him. This, don't we know this? When one of our family members suffers, the whole family suffers? He's not being selfish here. He's not saying have compassion on me, all of us, because my child has been living a hellish existence, and it's affected all of us. And Jesus said to him, "If you can," because notice, Jesus, if you can do something about this. And I like Jesus meets him right at the point of his doubt. All things are possible for one who believes. All right? And then, my favorite verse. I don't know of it all time. Right now it is. You know how that, you might have a favorite book. Just ask me in a week. I'll tell you it's something else. Right now, this verse, I just can't get out of my head. Mark 9:24. Immediately the father of the child cried out and said, "I believe. Help my unbelief." It's got to be either or, right? You believe or you don't. It's black and white. No. Do you ever identify with that? I do believe, but Lord, I also have some unbelief here. We might call it doubt. and he asked for help. Now, I want to give you two quotes here. I don't normally give back-to-back quotes from other writers. Very different, too. One is an old British dude from the 1800s named Charles Spurgeon, who preached on this passage, and this is what he wrote. He said, "It is very noticeable that he, the father, does not say, 'Lord, I believe, help my child,' nor does he say, 'Lord, I believe, now cast the devil out of my boy.' No, not at all. He perceives that his own doubt was harder to overcome than the devil, and that to heal him of a spiritual disease was a more needful work than even to heal his child of the sad malady under which he labored." I love that. May I encourage you, if you are a doubter, I mean if you're a doubter and you hold like an office in the church, because yes, that happens. I mean if you're a doubter and people look to you as a beacon of strength and trust, but you have doubts, may I encourage you to pray the prayer that this man prayed. Lord, I do believe, help my unbelief. It's dogging me pretty good. It's hitting me pretty good. I have a dear friend who died about a decade ago. And I got to tell you, I really, to this day, don't know if I've resolved it. He was a wonderful man, and he would often tell me, "Greg, I want to pray that my wife might go before me," which you might think, wait, that's kind of cruel, right? But it wasn't. He said, my prayer is that she might go before me so that I would be the one left to deal with the grief. It did not happen. And that has played with my mind for a long time. I just want to be honest, it bothers me. I don't understand to this day why God wouldn't grant such a selfless request. He just didn't grant it. Lisa's helped me with it a great deal. She's been such a support to me and told me things like, "Well, Greg, he died in his sleep, and he didn't know." And that does help a little bit, but this day it just bothers me. So I just want to tell you, I take that to him and I say, "Lord, I do believe, but help my unbelief, because I'm struggling trying to make sense of that." I've been struggling for 10 years. I can't tell you I've reached some resolve. And I make no apology for it, because I'm bringing that to the Lord again and again. My doubt, by the grace of God, has not won. I love Jesus. He's my Savior. He's my everything. But that doubt is real. And what's helped me is the fact that Jesus allows me to pray that prayer. Lord, I do believe, but help my unbelief. Remember, I said I have a second quote, very different source than a British Baptist preacher, but a brilliant. I wish I discovered her earlier in my life, but only in the past 5 years have I begun to read the Southern American novelist Flannery O'Connor, who died far too young. But she wrote this: "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief," is the most natural and most human and most agonizing prayer in the Gospels. And then this last thing, I can't thank her enough. And I think it is the foundation prayer of faith. So let me encourage you. God is for doubters. May we as a church be for doubters and give all the space, all the grace, and the place to say it without being Bible policed, without being punched for being wrong. Because I'd rather people want to be with us with their doubts than to be away from us with their doubts. Because it seems to me Jesus keeps drawing in Thomas and John and his dad and every one of us. Bring me your doubt. In fact, sometimes our doubt is the very thing that can help us go deeper. Because sometimes we take those questions and those uncertainties and we lay them bare before God. And you know what he shows us? He still loves us. He knows we're not him. He knows we don't have his eternal mind. And he loves us just the same. Takeaway thought I would give you is that doubt is not the opposite of faith. I hope I can show today, or I have shown, that I actually think it's a key ingredient of faith. Sometimes I get scared when people aren't, don't have a single struggle. I call that the me protest too much syndrome, right? You ever get that vibe? You see like a husband or wife on social media. Oh, it is such a privilege and pleasure to be with my husband, wife. They're the most wonderful people in the world. I can promise you, you'll never see that post from my wife. I don't think you'll ever see it. She loves me, but I don't think oh my goodness, just to be in Greg's presence, to hear his endless ADHD ramblings, to know that he remembers every episode of Breaking Bad but can't remember to pick up bread. Lord, thank you for this husband that you've given. I mean, you know what I'm saying here? I'm being very careful. Sometimes people that, there's just wonderful, everything's fantastic, everything's great, and I'm always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because that just doesn't seem like life to me. Sometimes it can be purposeful denial. And would we never be those, just things are peaches and cream, sunshine and rainbows. That's not usually